Yep.
All right. So you are, this is the Action Design ATX Meetup, where we focus on the art and science of improving human behavior at scale. We generally meet every fourth Monday, roughly in these times, but during COVID, we have adjusted that somewhat. You can follow us on a variety of different social channels, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or not even Instagram, that's LinkedIn, and that's through Action Design ATX. My name is Robin Kriegelstein. I'm the founder. We started this 8 years ago here in Austin, and then connected with the International Action Design Group, of which I'm now an officer. And the group has been expanding all over the world. It's in the tens of thousands of members, and this is even an old list of chapter cities. So if you're not from Austin, or you know people elsewhere in the country who may be interested, or in the world, have them check action-design.org and see if there's a chapter in their area. And if not, encourage them to start one. So we are sponsored by Live Neuron Labs. It's the behavioral design consultancy, of which I'm the CEO. We also focus on large-scale behavior change for good. We do consulting, training, and speaking. You can learn more about us at liveneuronlabs.com, or follow our social channels. And also our longtime sponsor, Capital Factory, which is the center of gravity for entrepreneurship in Texas. So anybody who's here in Austin should absolutely check out what Capital Factory is up to. And they've been opening branches in other cities as well. So I'd also like to thank Sparky Whitty and Alan May, who are with us tonight, our co-organizers who helped make this work. And tonight we are here to hear from the amazing, the exciting, our special guest, Evelyn Gosnell, Managing Director of Irrational Labs. Welcome, Evelyn. So Irrational Labs is, they do consulting, research, and boot camps on behavioral design. They're a leading behavioral design consultancy that was Dan Ariely helped found. So that's quite exciting. And they've worked with a number of really large brands, everyone from Google to Lyft to Microsoft to you name it, to World Bank, on and on. Very impressive clientele. So we're very excited to have Evelyn here tonight, who will be speaking on their Irrational Labs 3B framework. So if anybody's been around behavioral design for any amount of time, you know that the challenge is managing the vast amount of science pouring in and figuring out how do you actually get practical and tackle real world applications. How do you design real solutions? And so Irrational Labs has developed a 3B framework, and Evelyn will be sharing more on that tonight. But as I mentioned, they do have a boot camp. If you are excited and interested in what you hear about tonight, where they will go into that in much greater detail. So, and that's available virtually these days, as are many things. So we encourage you to check that out. You'll get a link. You can find it on their website, of course, Irrational Labs, but we'll be sharing links after the event. So what we'd like to do tonight is everyone have your cameras on. So there's a lot of best practices around how to make virtual events and virtual socializing and connecting and networking work. And it's useful to leverage cameras to have a much more personal experience and richer data flow between all of us. And especially tonight, Evelyn's going to be trying to do some interactivity and asking questions, and that some of which we'll want to be able to raise hands in order to answer to. So please go ahead and do that if you can. And also, by default, your mics are, well, actually, all of you are able to mute or unmute your mics during the talk, But what we ask you to do is keep it muted unless Evelyn, we will allow you to unmute for when Evelyn's asking specific questions. And then you can unmute quick to shout out your guess at the answer, what you have to offer. But also, chat is open for messages through to the admins. We'll be monitoring, so if you have questions for Evelyn, some of those we'll be able to pull and surface those to Evelyn during the talk so she can answer them. And then, as usual, not only is this great, these events are super great in hearing new material from amazing speakers like Evelyn. Another really important aspect of what we offer is the ability to network, to be able to connect with like-minded people. And so we've experimented with a variety of ways of facilitating that online. And we will be using Zoom's breakout rooms feature after the talk, where we'll separate everybody out automatically into smaller groups where you can then talk about what you just heard or anything you'd like at all, and then share with each other and ask questions. And then after that period, about half an hour or so of general small group networking, we'll bring it back together for anybody who's still left at the end there. We'll bring it back together with Evelyn and those of us that are still here to have a more open discussion with mics on. So we'll see how that goes at the end for those of us who are really into it. And without further ado, we will be handing it over to Evelyn now. Let me just give you the ability to grab screen share, or actually, why don't you go ahead, Evelyn, and while you start, I will give you screen share.
You have to give it to me. It says host disabled.
Yeah, exactly.
Wonderful. So thank you all for joining. I'm super excited. Again, I do wish we were in person. I am here in Austin. I would love to see all of your wonderful faces. It's been such a friendly place, and I've even started saying y'all. So, I've been here a bit. So I'm super happy to be talking to you about behavioral science and all things. Let's present. And yeah, we're going to have some interactivity just to keep us on our feet. But I am keeping this pretty casual, and I want to keep it lighthearted. There are some serious examples, but behavioral science is meant to be fun and interesting and dynamic. And let's just face it, these are hard times. So let's try and keep it light and engaging and fun. So let's go ahead and dive in. This should be a familiar concept. Raise your hand if you, at some point in this last election, heard or saw this idea of making a plan to vote. This is where your cameras being on is really helpful. So I can see. I see lots of hands going up. Yeah, we saw Barack Obama kind of making this sort of pitch. We saw lots of this messaging. And why is this? Why is this messaging being used? It turns out there's some research here. And let's go ahead and look at when is the first time I actually experienced this in real life. This was at the 2018 midterm election. Went to do door-to-door campaigning, and you show up and you're all excited and you get the script, and I was extra excited because as soon as I saw this script, I recognized the research that was behind it, right? I did a little happy dance saying, wow, there's academic research that's being done on how humans think, and it's being used in the world for good, right? To encourage people to vote. And so let's look at the script here. So there's an upcoming election, please go vote. We ask the potential voter, will they vote? Very normal, right? Then these other questions are added in. When will you vote? Where will you be coming from? And how will you get to the polls? Now, why am I asking these questions? Anyone want to unmute and share? What would be the point of a door-to-door volunteer to ask these questions?
To get a potential voter to take action.
To take action, but what about these questions makes it more likely, do we think, to take action?
They actually have to figure out if these are the things they're going to do and if they're going to work.
Yeah. Again, this is pre-COVID. So where will you be coming from? Oh yeah, Tuesdays I have that marketing meeting, and that one guy, Larry, he always goes really long. So maybe I should go in the morning beforehand, or how, maybe you're kind of thinking through the details that makes it much more likely then when the day comes to go ahead and be able to execute on that plan. So these questions here are interesting. And so this research was done by Todd Rogers at Harvard. And what he did, obviously before this campaign, he ran this study where he said, let's compare groups. First group, people are not contacted about the election. There's one person, can we mute? There's a little bit of background noise. Not contacting, sort of the control group, a second group where people get just a standard typical script about the upcoming election, and then this third group where they were asked these, what we call implementation intentions, to think through. Again, I don't need these answers in any way, right? When I go door to door, I don't need to write down the answers to these questions. I'm more going to write down, was it a positive interaction? Will they likely be voting, or will they be supporting the other side? But these questions, not relevant. It's just to prompt that thought process, right? And so what happened in this study, what we found, what the researchers here found, was there was a significant difference. Again, these percentages, of course, don't seem that large, but we know in this election, in previous elections, it really matters that these elections have come this close. And so this, to look at the difference between the typical script at 2% turnout rate and showing up to vote, and 4.1%, right? Our recent elections have hinged on this type of number. So I kind of wanted to start with why behavioral science matters, understanding behavior and designing things in a way to change it. We can do this for areas that are really important, big problems in the world. So I wanted to start with that. I know that not all of us, of course, are solving things like voting. Maybe in our day-to-day, we're maybe focused on products, right? So we were thinking about how do we get people to complete the user flow, the sign-up flow, or how do we increase retention? These are oftentimes things that we're thinking about. Now, these at surface, of course, are product challenges, but what's interesting here is they're also behavioral challenges. Understanding how the brain works, what are the biases that affect us, can help us solve these problems better. Right? So these answers exist out there. It's a question about understanding human decision-making. Oops. And we call this behavioral design. And basically this is at a high level, taking all of the insights, right? There's so much research that a lot of academic folks have done in academic journals. How do we actually create processes out of that? How do we translate that into frameworks, into usable strategies for us to inform how we design products? How do we communicate with customers? What does the user flow look like? And how do we put all this together? So what does that look like? Let's start with, I'm sure this is familiar to mostly everyone in the room, but before we get into the 3B framework, let's just start at baseline with 3 foundational concepts. The first one, very easy. People are not always rational. This is probably the core difference between when we think about standard economics, which has this assumption about people being rational, about maximizing their utility, looking at all of their choice sets and picking the best ones, and behavioral economics, which makes no such assumption. Now, just for fun, let's go ahead and illustrate this. We're going to raise our hands again. So imagine we were all hanging out together right now, and I said, I have this small box of chocolates I'm going to give you right now, or in a week, I'm going to give you a large box of chocolates. What are you going to pick? Raise your hand if you're going to pick today. Raise your hand if you're going to pick in a week. Okay, you guys have good self-control because it was a little split. But typically, that's a compliment, right? You guys are just smarter than the average average person. Typically, what we see is a lot of people, and maybe this would work. I'm going to caveat. I'm going to save myself here. It would work. I have a hypothesis that it would work differently if we were physically actually all together, and I had the chocolate, and I kind of whiffed it under your nose, and you could smell it, and it was like, I'm actually going to give you this chocolate right now, and as soon as I give it to you, you're going to be able to eat it, right? This idea of this immediate gratification. So people typically pick the today. Now, what if we change it here? to 1 year. So you get the small box in a year from now, or you get the large box a year plus 1 week. What happens? Fairly, there's a reason I set up these slides this way, right? It shifts, the preference shifts. And what's interesting about this is from a purely economic standpoint, either a larger box of chocolate is worth waiting an extra week for, or it's not. It should make no difference, the fact that one of the options is today, and yet because of present bias, because we have such a hard time resisting the now weighs so much, benefits that we get right now are just much more compelling to us. We see this shift in preferences. So that's the first piece. We are not always rational. The second one is that this assumption that we might have about information changing behavior is not necessarily always true. So raise your hand if you remember this campaign, 5 a day for better health. Oops, a few people. That was a trick question. You're kind of aging yourselves, by the way. I'm just kidding. I remember it too. I'm old too by now. Okay, so this was a campaign that was run by the government, and it was about teaching folks the idea of let's get them to eat at least 5 fruits or vegetables a day. Seems like an easy thing to remember. Let's do a whole big campaign. We're going to do advertising. We're going to do billboards. We're going to teach people that this is the thing, that in order to be healthy, they should eat 5 fruits and vegetables a day. And how well did it work? Let's look at it. Amazing results, right? Dramatic increase. Do people know that they should eat 5 fruits or vegetables a day? Hashtag winning. Look at those bars, right? Big jump. What's the problem with this graph? Anyone unmute?
Whether they're aware versus whether they did it.
And what's your hypothesis on whether they did it or not? To what extent did they do it?
A majority of them probably didn't. Maybe some tried for a day or a week or some short period of time. And very few, if any, probably had any lasting changes.
Very good. So sadly, this is the chart for consumption. The bars are exactly the same. So no change in consumption. And so this is so important because it's just our go-to strategy for how do we want to change behavior? Let's teach people, let's tell them the thing. And oftentimes telling the thing doesn't work. This is kind of the fundamental gap. It's not because they don't know. There's all kinds of other things in the way of this behavior. An intention is often there, but there's a gap between our intention and our action. Okay, and the third one, the third foundational concept is that the situation, the overall context really matters, and we really want to understand that to be able to design the behavior that we want. So from the outside, we could say, oh, I'm solving for people who need to show up to their appointments. And why are they missing their appointments? What kind of person is just sitting there being like, oh, okay, whatever, the appointment is not important to me, I'm just not going to show up. And yet the reality oftentimes looks much more like this. It's not a question of, oh yeah, I woke up today and decided to skip my appointment. It's that there's the surrounding environment. There's so much noise. Think about all of the apps. Look at your phone. How many notifications are you getting from your phone? How many, people have family pressures, they have jobs, they have all the kind of surrounding environment that it's our responsibility as product people to understand and to come up with solutions that, understand the overall environment and take that into account. Okay, so those are the 3 pieces. The good news here is that changing while doing this is hard. Taking this behavioral approach isn't always the easiest path. I'm going to walk through the 3B framework, and there's some challenging bits to it, but on the upside, it is often a lot faster and easier than fill in the blank on your latest initiative. How many times do we say, well, let's launch this whole new thing? We're going to, even the example that I was giving earlier, if we're going to do a campaign around education that, again, for healthy eating, that didn't end up even working, but that was super expensive, right? The US government spent millions of dollars on that campaign. So understanding behavioral science and how the brain works and what biases affect us is a kind of shortcut to improving our outcomes. Okay, so we went over these three principles. People are not always rational, information doesn't change behavior, and really understanding the context matters. Now let's get to the framework. I understand some of you are already familiar with this. It's very simple, and that's for a good reason, right? We start with a key behavior. We try to reduce the barriers along the way, and we try to amplify the benefits of doing that behavior. Now, it seems kind of stupidly simple. Frameworks often are sort of a simplification, but we found that especially when you're working with teams, so we imagine that you and your, in your role, you're not doing this by yourself. There's an opportunity to create a shared approach, kind of a common language to get the people who are going to be working with you on solving for X together, a shared approach, a shared language, a shared methodology. And this is really simple, easy for people to remember and kind of stick to. So let's start with the first piece, which is actually often the most challenging, surprisingly so. And it's, what is your key behavior? What is the behavior you are trying to solve for? And getting alignment with your team on this actually often takes some time. When we used to do the boot camp in person, and we'd split up teams and we'd say, okay, like solve for this. This actually takes quite a bit of time because we might have an assumption, right? You're starting with an outcome. I'm trying to get people to eat healthier, right? That's an outcome. We want to convert that into specific behaviors. What does that look like? Eat healthier. Is that salad at lunchtime? Is that, signing up for a food delivery service so you don't have to you typically drive home and you get fast food on the way from work. So it's really understanding and narrowing on a behavior and not just outcomes, right? Outcome meaning, losing weight, sleep, having more sleep, things like that. Okay, so getting very, very specific and converting an outcome to a behavior, right? So what are the exact things that you need to do? And let me illustrate this with an example, because I think this will become clearer on how important it is to solve for the right key behavior. Okay, so why do people sign up from ClassPass? By the way, this makes me nostalgic. Did anyone have ClassPass pre-COVID? Yeah, this makes me nostalgic to be able to exercise in gyms. So for those who don't know, ClassPass is an app that gives you access to lots of different gyms at once. So you could do yoga on one day, you could do kickboxing another day. It gives you a broad array of options. And if we think about who's signing up for ClassPass and what are they solving for, likely it's probably one of two things. They may want to lose weight, or it may not be a weight thing and it just might be just a fitness. They want to become more fit. Now, if you're ClassPass, what is the key behavior then? Anyone want to take some guesses? What is the behavior we want a ClassPass user to take? And there's more than one often, by the way. When I was talking about the eating piece, that's the challenge of eating, right? It's not like you could just say, just eat salad. There's lots of other things. There's all kinds of moments of temptation. It's eat salad, but it's also don't eat the donut for breakfast. It's lots and lots of moments of intervention. So for ClassPass, what do we think might be a key behavior?
They want people to sign up for the classes in their network.
Yes, you want them to sign up. Yeah, that's a great start. What the next step is after signing up?
I'd say following through rather than canceling.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Which they do a good job of, right? Because there's a penalty for not showing up.
Yes. Also inviting friends, adding that added layer of accountability.
Excellent. Yes. Designing for that key behavior as well. Showing up will be more likely if you have friends show up.
Be willing to try something new.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. This is great. Thank you. So this is a screen. This is one of the screens in the flow, and it says book it again. And this is a bar class. So let's say they know you took bar class last Tuesday at 6 a.m. And so now they're proposing bar Tuesday, 6 a.m. Very logical, right? It makes sense. We know that that time is available. We know you tried bar. High probability that you might do this again. But if we're thinking about the outcome that we want, increased fitness or even weight loss, either way, doing the same exercise over and over again is not what gets you there, right? It's the variety, it's pushing different muscle groups, challenging our body past that point is what's going to work. So if we're solving for different types of exercise, if this is our actual key behavior, we would design, look at the difference between the left and the right here. So instead of book it again, imagine a world where we took this territory and we said recommended. And we took that same time frame because we knew that that was high probability to be available, but we now instead say, oh, Pilates. And you could also probably use some data on the back end to say, there's some people who like barre tend to like Pilates or something like that. I made this up. Of course, this is just a mock-up, but I imagine you could use some data to make a good informed decision here. But the point is you're not just creating the path of least resistance around taking the same class over and over and over again. That's not the goal. If we start from the outcome and we translate it into the right key behavior, and this is where, you know, you should storm with your team, you know, after this session, text them later tonight and be like, hey, what are the behaviors that you think we're solving for? And I would bet money that it's not 100% aligned. And if it is, then great job. Your job will be much easier if you are very clearly aligned on this. By the way, a little anecdote on this. One time we worked with a company and they hired us to like increase engagement. Engagement, by the way, is such a hot topic. Like San Francisco, Silicon Valley, everyone's engagement, great. So you separate 12 top execs and you're like, cool, you're solving for engagement. Tell me exactly what that means. What do you want the user to do? Guess what happened? Lots of different answers. So if you all can't decide what you want the user to do, no wonder your homepage looks insane. The user is completely lost and doesn't know what to do because you internally don't have that alignment. So this is where, again, it sounds really easy to define the key behavior, but once you actually start doing the exercise, it gets more complicated and interesting. So I mentioned sleeping more. This is obviously highly correlated to health outcomes. So what does that mean? What if we were trying to solve for improved sleep, what would be a key behavior around this? What's one idea?
A consistent schedule.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Especially around bedtime, right? Going to bed at a certain time. So from a, you know, kind of intuition standpoint, and there's many apps out there that say, let's show people all this data. Like there's so many sleep apps that show this. Okay, so you told me I didn't sleep very well last night. Great, now I'm just stressed out about the fact because I know the health impact, the long-term health impact. How is this changing behavior? Turns out not so much, right? Turns out that what we likely should be solving for is this idea of going to bed at a specific time, having a wind down routine around this. These are behaviors that we can then solve for, right? So being really clear on the behavior then allows us to design something very different. This is Apple's newest attempt at this, right? Where sleep schedule, exactly right. Creating that sleep schedule, creating sleep mode where there's things like do not disturb, where your notifications, all of that stuff stops distracting you. And I really like this in particular because this is from an ethical standpoint, again, there's some nice alignment here. On the one hand, you could imagine that the iPhone or Apple wouldn't want to create a process that would have you use your phone less. But this is a really nice thing of like saying, bigger picture, how do we align with the user's goals? If they care about their long-term health, if they want to be sleeping better, then really what that means is cutting out distractions. We shouldn't be using our phone an hour before bed. And so how can we help the user actually do that? Okay, so there's 3 B's. We started with key behavior. Let's shift over to reducing barriers and amplifying benefits. And what I've been really talking about at a high level here is creating the path of least resistance for that key behavior, right? Decreasing barriers, increasing benefits. On the barrier side, there's 2 components of that. One is just the logistical number of actual steps you have to do. And then second, it's the psychological barriers. So there might be barriers like information avoidance, right? Like I don't want to look at my finances right now because I don't want to see the picture that's in there, right? So that would be a psychological barrier. And then we're going to talk about the other B, which is increasing benefits. To start with barriers, the first element of this is very, very simple. Again, silly simple. It's just about reducing friction. And very often, most companies, this is really, I don't want to say easy, but there's a lot of opportunity here. There's a lot of steps that you could, once you map out the process, this is another area where, by the way, we can ask, by the way, how many steps are there in your sign-up flow? And you can ask a PM this and they'll say, 5. And then you actually sit with them and say, let's map it out. Oh, yeah, there's 17. I didn't realize that. So you want to look at each step in a lot of detail, and there's a lot of opportunity here to be reducing friction. Let's drive this point home, though, with a relevant example, a relevant problem to society, and that's the question of opioids. How do we lower the likelihood of new people who aren't currently addicted to opioids getting addicted? What do we do? What is the study that was done here? Actually, first let's start with, it's known, the CDC have very clear guidelines on this, and doctors generally know this, that the best practice here is to start low, the low amount of pills, increase it if you need to over time, but just start with a low amount and don't give any more than needed, right? You can add another prescription later if necessary. So it's not a lack of information. We've kind of checked that box. If we look at the actual data around how many pills are typically given, 40% of the time, the prescription is of 30 pills. That's a quite high number. So what did researchers in this case do to drop it by 2/3? Anyone know this study? Anyone sneak and look at my slides before we started this presentation? Any guesses?
Was it peer comparison?
Nice guess. Is that Sparky? Nice. It's a good guess. I'd be curious to see how that would do. I'll give you a hint. Organ donation. Does that tell you anything? Organ donation example is about defaults, and here they changed the default. So the question is, this is the distribution before. This is 40%, 30 pills, 2% were 12 pills. And what happens when we change the default? We shift the distribution. So now in the system, when the doctor goes to prescribe the opioid, instead of the default being 30, which is what it was, the default is now 12. And now he or she is more likely to prescribe 12 pills instead of 30. Now, this is pretty crazy because we think that we know that doctors are highly educated, highly trained. They should be making this decision based on the case and what they know about, how much pain this patient is going to be in and the dangers of opioids and all of these things, and should not be influenced something as so small as in the medical system when they go to prescribe it, what's in the drop down, the default number. And yet we see here such a small thing like that and these are, like, I'm using a dramatic example here, but these are real lives at stake, right? The probability of people getting addicted to opioid, this is what is at stake here. It's a small change like that. This is just to really drill home the point. Friction really matters. We want to think deeply, and there's so many opportunities for us to reduce friction. So this is really very simple. In our toolkit, reduce or remove friction that is in the way of the key behavior. Nice example, a COVID example. What have we seen with delivery apps? In the beginning, they started adding a no contact option. Now it's very often the default. It's a nice little change. This means more people will have their food delivered without contact. This is what we want. Meditation app. Anyone use meditation apps? This is Sam Harris's Waking Up. So if the barrier is an attentional barrier, imagine you are new to meditation. You're not in the habit of doing meditation every day. So you may need a reminder, right? That is this a barrier, attention, solution, reducing that barrier is adding a reminder. The other thing that's happening here is that there's some defaults already added, right? It's probably better to meditate in the morning. So that's already set. And the default of every day is already set. So the frictionless way to do this is to just say, set a reminder. You can change it if you want, but you want to design for the ideal behavior. And that's what they've done here. Okay, this is a fun story. This is what not to do. This is a flyer that I saw at Aetna, who was doing a very, I do admire a super creative campaign they had. They were basically solving for, they had an idea for seniors, saying seniors may be less comfortable with all this new technology that's out there to help us become more fit. So we have these trackers, so many trackers that exist on the market, but maybe they're not as comfortable. So let's lower the barrier to that. Let's, instead of them having to buy it, we're going to purchase and put these in stock in our company downstairs. We sort of had this like nice health clinic area, and they had these beautiful display and all of these wonderful fitness trackers that people could borrow out for a few weeks, and then they could decide and purchase whichever one they wanted on their own. So really nice idea conceptually, right? What is your reaction to this flyer?
The choices.
The choices, yeah. Which one would you choose?
It's kind of like the medical opioid question, which is, what's the real question you should be asking? In the opioid side, it probably shouldn't be how many days. It should have something to do with, what kind of treatment do they need to receive? And in this case, picking amongst all these things is based on some set of characteristics about what you're going to do. If you're going to go swimming all the time, that's a whole lot different than if you're going to be walking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So absolutely, we could imagine a world where this was redesigned and we would group the ones that, worked underwater. We could group the ones that track your heart rate, and in addition to your steps, we could group these. I actually would even take an even simpler, like maybe there should be groupings, but I would allocate a full quarter of the page to just say, recommended, start here. Like there's 17 things on here, but just give me the one that I should start with. If you want, especially the target population here, which is seniors who may not be as comfortable. And I think this is just a great example of us overestimating the importance of choice, right? This is America and freedom and choice. And we let's the user pick. But yet someone at Aetna, it was their job to sit there and research all of these things, right? They did this isn't a full list. There's many, many more fitness trackers than 17. Someone came up with this list. Someone spent hours and hours doing this. So there's an information asymmetry here. So you might as well be of service, help the user choose the best thing. So I'm not even saying here, take away choice. You could keep all 17 options, but kind of give central location to one main one, and then group the rest of them. And then what I would do then is have much higher stock, because you're going to have these in your office for people to rent out, have much higher stock of the one that you're recommending, because most likely that's what people pick. Okay, so we've been talking about friction. The other opportunity here is to add friction in a good way. So we talked about sleep, right? So there's a temptation to look at our phone, to fiddle with it late at night. But what if there's an extra screen, a slight little barrier point that I have to get past? It's just kind of a little reminder to me, oh yeah, I'm not supposed to be using my phone now. Okay, cool. This is a nice example from Twitter, which found that in their data, a lot of people were retweeting articles just by looking at the headline and had not necessarily clicked on them, right? And so could we create a friction point to say, hey, by the way, headlines don't tell the full story, and give them the option of reading it. So it doesn't force them to. But this was actually increased the number of times people clicked on the article before tweeting by 33%. So Twitter is very forthcoming in the experiments that they run and sharing the data. So we know that. And I think it's just a wonderful outcome of using behavioral science this small idea of a little bit of friction for good, because that means, you know, they're not just tweeting something, oh, that aligns with my views, I'm just going to go ahead and tweet that, or I don't really know what the detail of the article says, let me go ahead and share that. This is creating that friction point, a tiny friction point for good. Okay, so we've been talking about reducing friction, which is a sort of key component of decreasing barriers. The next piece of that is creating the right mental model. What is a mental model, kind of view of the world? And specifically for a product, let's use this example. Duolingo is an app that helps people learn a foreign language. And if you're, again, new to learning a foreign language, you might not know, how should I approach it? Am I supposed to do it every day? Am I supposed to do it once a week? Am I supposed to do it once a month? Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, right? And so what this nicely kind of sets up is a mental model of, oh, clearly it's supposed to be a daily thing. And there's different kind of levels that you can set here. So it's kind of creating a worldview of how to use this product, how to gain this skill best. This is another funny one to me. This is Bumble, which is a dating app. And so what we see here, there are numbers. There's a number, the numbers is just a design feature that I just add, but the point is there's slots, 1, 2, 3. What this is, imagine a world where we were just suggesting people talk to one person at a time. This app would look very different. This design is clearly suggesting, oh, you should be talking to multiple people at the same time. So it's creating a mental model of how to interact with the product. One more example on mental models that I really like, this comes from Dan Ariely, by the way. I sometimes hear these ideas and I store them away for myself, like note to self, if I ever have kids, I'm going to copy this idea. Because what he did with his kids when they were younger and they had an allowance, he split it into 3. Instead of just saying, here's the money for the week or the month, however he did it, he grouped it into 3 buckets. This is the money for you to spend on yourself. This is the money for you to spend on others, people that you know. And there was a third category, which I think is so beautiful. This is the bucket of money that you should spend on others, people that you don't know. And so he's shaping their mental model of how they should think about money. And I think that's, especially that third category of creating this view of like, oh, that's how we should interact as humans, not just, okay, money for myself, money for people that I know, and money for people that I don't know. I think that's beautiful. So now you can take it too, sharing these tips if you all have kids. Okay, so the last B is about increasing benefits. A lot of times there aren't necessarily benefits. So can we increase them, or can we also bring them closer to the present? So we talked about present bias. Here's a really nice example of present bias. Raise your hand if you're watching more Netflix nowadays in COVID. Guilty as charged, yes. So there's a nice study on this that says, tell me, what movies you want to watch in the future. And what do people pick? It's a really beautiful story that we tell ourselves that I'm the type of person who watches foreign films and documentaries, right? I am intellectually curious and I watch all of these deep things that make me a better person. And when we ask people, what would you like to watch right now? Like tonight, you get to watch this. What happens to their selection? It's lowbrow humor. Can anyone relate to this? Raise your hand. Anyone guilty here as well? Okay, good. I'm glad everyone's being honest. It's very helpful. Okay, so we're dealing with present bias. And so this is a nice little matrix to think about benefits, where oftentimes we're in this sort of light gray box here, where it's a functional benefit and it's in the future. And that's a really hard space to be in. And ideally, we want to be in this fuchsia pink box where it's a hedonic benefit and they get it now. But I mean, if you're like Coca-Cola, fine, your job is easy. You're up in this space. Most of us are functioning in this other space, future and functional, right? Saving money for our future, do healthy, exercise, like healthy eating. All of these things are not in this challenging space at the bottom left. But the question is, can we add
I'd even say that all the big world problems, including dealing with COVID, are in that quadrant. And
yeah, exactly. It's a hard space to be in.
Yeah.
But we can be creative. This is our
solve them.
task. This is our challenge, to be creative around adding benefits that are in either any of these other boxes, basically. You can't always add hedonic and now, but even these other boxes are more motivating, right? So let's talk about voting, talking about big problems. The main benefit is here in the gray, right? Eventually, if your candidate gets elected, they will implement the policies that you support. Now, anyone have any ideas of what exists in these other, maybe in this top right box? Anything about voting, especially voting in person? I know this year's hard because a lot of people voted by mail, but when we vote in person, what happens?
Oh, sticker.
Sticker, ding, ding, ding. So sticker is in the top right because you get to feel good about yourself. You get to signal to other people that you're that kind of person who votes and you care and right? So you get that sticker. A sticker is absolutely in the top right. And that was one of the, again, it's great that we had record turnout, but that was like a challenge of this year. Like, we don't get the stickers. How do we create the virtual version of the stickers? Now, there's another example in voting that I love when I saw this. And this is particularly relevant to where there's long lines. And so how would you solve for long lines? Getting people to stay in that line and wait, which we know people hate waiting. What's the benefit now?
Here in Austin, I saw some guitarists playing outside voting locations.
Oh, I love that. I didn't see that, but I love it. I went to the public library. There was no line. So that's beautiful.
Maybe more for non-COVID times that provide food.
Ding, 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 food. Yep. So this is a website. By the way, everyone write it down so that we can all support it. Pizza to the polls. So people can go on there and report where there's a line, and then you can donate for pizzas to be ordered for people to get pizza while they're waiting. So there's again, think about the matrix. This is a short-term immediate benefit. Enrique's writing it down. Enrique's in local politics. Writing it down. So this idea of how do we add something beneficial now? Because the real reason, again, caring about democracy, caring about our vote battering, all of those things, of course, are real, and it's not going away. But how do we, if there's a friction point of waiting that we now have to fight against, how do we add a benefit that's kind of layers on top of that and is again, hedonic and now? Okay, benefits are hard. Like I said before, when we're thinking about the 3 Bs, barriers tend to be an easier place where there's more low-hanging fruit, and teams just come up with solutions kind of faster. It's easier to get rid of friction. Benefits are challenging, so I would really encourage us to be creative and push ourselves to think hard on this. And I love this example from Apple. What this shows here, most of you are familiar with it, right? The idea of if you are texting with somebody who also has an iPhone, it looks one way. And if you're texting with, one of those people, Android, looks different. And so what this does is it creates pressure. If you have an iPhone, there's literally real conversations about this, like, I don't want to be relegated to like the green text option. I don't want to be excluded in that way because group texts don't work in the same way. There's all these kind of things that get funky, but even the idea of blue and green, if there's a signaling here that happens. So really clever on Apple's part. So this is where, again, benefits are harder to think of in creative ways, but I think everyone's here is smart. We need to push ourselves to think creatively to come up with powerful benefits. So let me leave you with one last example as we wrap up and tie this all together. And this example comes from the Kibera, which is a slum in Nairobi where people live very low, very poor lifestyle, very kind of subsistence living. So the idea here, of course, is not to get them to save for retirement. That is not even on the table. This is just, can we get them to save put a tiny bit of money aside for a rainy day? Is that even possible? Or is it just such a low level of kind of subsistence living that that's not possible? So that's our key behavior. Can we get people to put money aside for a rainy day? Kind of the research question. Now, applying the second B, barriers. What does this look like? This means let's create a system where it's easy to put money in. In Kenya, they use a mobile banking called M-Pesa, and they can just on their phone easily deposit money into this account. Everyone uses it. It's kind of very high adoption rate. So low barrier for the desired behavior, easy in. But we're going to make it slightly more difficult to take it out. So you do have to kind of, go into town, you take a bus, go into town, and go take it out. And this is what we want for emergency savings, right? So imagine if you didn't have this and I just said to you, just use one pocket. Or envelopes, right? Envelopes or pockets. Right now, if you were saving money, use your left pocket for saving and your right pocket for your spending money. What would happen to most of us if we did that? I see some chuckles, some laughing. Tell us what you would do, Jenny.
It wouldn't work.
It wouldn't work. You would kind of justify like, oh, this is an emergency, right? I need
these shoes.
I need these shoes. There you go. Thank you, Jenny. So we want to create enough so that it's accessible. If it is a true emergency, they can get it out, of course. But we want to create a little bit of a friction point. So there's an imbalance here, easy in, difficult out. So this is the concept of barriers, creating the barrier around the undesired behavior and no barrier or very low barrier for the desired behavior. So this is the first B. Now let's think about the benefits. So this is a creative approach to benefits. And I want you to pay attention because we're going to vote on what you think is the most effective. So there were two non-financial incentives. First, this was all, by the way, done by, it was sort of text reminders that were sent. Someone's in the, there we go. So the first non-financial incentive was a text. What's happening? Okay, tech challenges. We're all good. You can hear me? Okay, so non-financial incentives, sorry. Two conditions there. First was using the idea of your kids, right? So imagine if you had a child, your child's name is Elio, and the text was sent as though it was from Elio. Please deposit as much as you can into this account. The second non-financial incentive was a coin. It was like a plastic coin about this big. It looked like it was gold, and you would scratch on it if you had saved that week. And then there were two financial incentives that matched. There was actually kind of four here, but for the purpose of this exercise, we'll group them. Matching, which is like if you deposit if you save this amount, we will match it by 10%. And then pre-match, which is playing on the principle of loss aversion, which is where the money is already in the account. And if you don't save as you're supposed to save, then the money gets taken away, right? So the match gets taken away if you don't do the behavior. Now, we're going to vote on these four conditions. This will be a test. So write it down so you can't change. This is a tricky thing where people are like, oh no, okay. So who thinks that it's kids? I don't see hands up. Nobody loves their kids. Okay. Oh, we see the people who maybe don't have kids raising their hands. Okay. Who thinks it's the coin? Some hands going up for the coin. A couple hands. Who thinks it's the financial incentive match? And who thinks it's the pre-match? Yeah, some votes there. Okay. Why do you think it's the pre-match? Just share out loud. Or generally, why do you think for those of you who picked the financial incentive, why do you think that would be the most effective?
Loss aversion is really strong, which is why I guessed pre-match.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Okay, drum roll for the results. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so this is the graph of the end results. The coin condition won by a lot, which is a very interesting finding that we'll talk about in just a second. But I want to start with, since when we set this up, we started with barriers. So just look at the control is where there's no system in place, right? They don't have the access to this easy in, difficult out. And then there's sort of the reminders. So just setting up a system easy in, difficult out already increases savings. You don't even need to add incentives. Even without the incentives, right? There's an effect here, right? And then if we look at kids, the other interesting thing here is financial incentives. Kids work just as well, right? Very interesting finding that emotional appeals can often be strong. Like, we need to think differently. This rational kind of Homo economicus mindset of like people be, the most rational thing to do here would be to do the match at 20%, right? There should be no difference between pre-match or post-match whatsoever. That's the rational model. So that's the other interesting thing. And then let's talk about the coin. For anyone who guessed the coin, let's have you talk through why.
Just
Because
thinking
they
the
have
coin is, go ahead.
I was just going to say they have something to show or see close to them always.
Exactly. And I love that you said both things. See, because it's really there all the time. So the difference actually in these conditions is the coin, if you look at the savings that happened, the deposits happened all the time, regardless of when the text, like, it didn't depend on the text kind of reminder. So it wasn't like on the day that there was a difference. It was a more even sort of savings because it was physically there. Remember, these are like very small huts. There's not a lot of stuff. This coin takes a large kind of prominent place. And the other word that you said was show. And I think that's also really important. So if you think about any kind of savings that we're making now, for those of you who have kids, you might be saving for their kids, for their college account. Now, and when you do that, it's not like they see that money, right? You putting a lot of money into their college savings account this year might mean, oh, maybe you're not going to get to go to that summer camp that you usually get to go to. So there's trade-offs, but they don't see the money that goes into the college account. They see the fact that they don't get to go to the summer camp or they don't get to get this new, Nintendo, whatever the latest technology that kids are playing with. They can see the absence of something, but they don't see the fact that you're putting it away. And that piece is so real here, where it's no longer about summer camp. It's literally, there's less food on the table tonight if I save this week, right? It's very salient to the family. But now you're not saying that there's less. The coin now allows you to kind of show it's not less, it's different. We're putting it aside, right? So that's kind of the story here around, it's really interesting and important for us to test different incentives against each other, because our common assumptions about what might work the best may not always play out to be true. Okay, so we went through, speed roll through the 3 Bs. I wanted to open up to any questions now. I'm gonna chat out the link too, if anyone's interested in the bootcamp. Would love to have you join that. But let's open it up for questions or reactions or comments.
Hi, my name's Chelsea. My question is, I almost wonder if there should be a 4th B and best time. And the reason for that is, say, for instance, with like a more salient example would be COVID tracing apps, right? So for instance, usually in health, just a general out in the universe, right? So I might be going about my day-to-day life and see it. But if instead I was told, hey, you just came for a COVID test, thanks for being great wherever you're from, Texan, and thanks for helping keep me safe. We recommend you download this app, this tracing app. Then that all of a sudden changes my willingness to do something. And it's not really that the benefit or the barrier is different. It's just the timing. Mm-hmm. So just curious on your thoughts.
Yeah, no, timing is absolutely a very, very relevant thing. It's one of the reasons we work a lot with kind of marketing teams or comms teams, and this gets complicated with legal stuff, but in a perfect world, if you have 2 options between email and text, texting allows you to be much more precise because you are more like it's not like you're controlling when they read it, but most people read the text as soon as they get it. Whereas email, you're dependent on open rate, and you don't, first of all, and second of all, you just have a lot less control over when they're going to be looking at it. So absolutely concur with you that timing is super important. And even within, what I would say is within the 3 Bs and the benefits side, the biggest thing we push so hard is like take your existing benefit and pull it all the way up to as soon as now as you can, or add a benefit that's in the now, right? It's a great point, yes. Other questions? What was the most surprising, you guys can, I want to just hear your thoughts. What was the most surprising thing from today from the 3 Bs, from the examples? Anything that stood out? Anything that you're going to now go to your roommate or spouse or whomever to be like, oh, did you know this? You can set up the experiment and tell them for them. You're going to play the trick, the coin study, find out what they would have picked. Jenny's going to do that.
I really liked the part about mental models. You know, even the screen you showed of the different fitness trackers, like that tells me I should be deliberating very thoroughly about those options when maybe that's not really the case.
Yeah.
And I like the Bumble example as well.
Yeah. And there are different models, right? There are, for online dating, there are other ones that encourage much more of a kind of a one-by-one approach. So it isn't universally true that we should necessarily always be talking to multiple people. It's a choice. It's a product design choice.
I'm always impressed by the example of voting and how much people like stickers and adding immediate benefit. And I also read a recent article in New Zealand. I think recycling rates tend to be lower there, and a county wanted to increase local recycling rates. So they started, instead of shaming people who didn't recycle well, they started adding large gold stickers to the recycling bins of people who recycled well and had consistently like well-sorted recycling. And I don't think it's super scientific, but all of a sudden they did definitely have significantly increased rates, and people started asking, how do I get one of those stickers? And they did find it really worked to increase their recycling, although I don't know how, what sort of scientific analysis they did, if any.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful anecdote. By the way, a lot of these behaviors that are, we can talk back to kind of the coin study as well. A lot of these behaviors that are good, that we want people to do, are private. So if you think about saving, it's a private, no one knows. It's not a norm, at least in the United States, to be like, look how much I have in my savings account. And yet spending is a public thing. We can see based on the type of car, you know, and it's crazy because often that person doesn't even own that car, right? It's a loan, but the consumption is public and the desired behavior is private. And so how can we equalize those more? And really one of the nice, so environmentally, right? When you recycled in the past, you don't get any credit. You don't seem like an awesome environmentally conscious person. One of the things that really was the first shift that allowed that kind of signaling, again, it's old story now, but is the Prius. The Prius was one of the first big examples of a powerful way to signal, like, I'm an environmentally conscious person. You can't see all the recycling that I do, but like, this is like a big public display of my environmental signaling. Okay, I got a chat question here. We hear about nudges and habits. How does 3B fit in that context? Great question. So with the key behavior, one of the things that I didn't go into for the purposes of time, but we can take the time now, is really splitting out and understanding, is this a one-time behavior that I need people to do, or am I trying to create a habit around this? Is this a repeat behavior? Because your solution set between the two of those is going to be very different. So if, whenever possible, if you can do the one thing that will change people's behavior dramatically, that will be much better. That's one of the reasons that like eating and like weight loss, all of that is such a hard thing. As we talked about, there's so many moments that you need to intervene on. You need to not eat the donuts that, you know, Tim brought in. Tim always brings in donuts to the office. You need to not eat those this morning. You need to, on the way home, not stop this place. So there's lots and lots of moments like that. So is there a single course of action? Can you buy smaller plates for yourself in a one-time swoop. And now most of your meals will be eating slightly less, just a little bit, slightly smaller? Or do you sign up for that subscription that delivers you the vegetables once a week? You know, it's a one-time things. Do you buy a dog? So your dog now, if you're trying to move more, it's a single action. You've got a dog, now you have to walk the dog every day. That's a very different thing than without the dog trying to remind yourself like, oh, I got to go walking today. And again, today I got to go walking, right? The friction point of that, but versus just a single act of walking the dog. These are great questions. What are the big differences between your behavioral design and the health design boot camps? And would the health design course be just as valuable for in-person health services versus health products? Okay, great question. So they are, they're similar in terms of, you know, obviously our brain and our biases that part doesn't change, but what we've adapted in the health boot camp is the examples. So we learn by examples, right? In this whole talk, I wasn't just saying, this is a behavioral principle, right? It helps us learn when we say, this is an app that does it well. Here's the Aetna example that does it poorly, right? We want to talk through the examples. So the principles, first of all, the principles are slightly different because some of the pieces are adapted. So, right, in health, we might have a barrier, which is information avoidance. There's research around the fact that I don't want to see those test results. Like, people will literally pay money for certain STDs. They don't want to, I don't want to know that you can get the test result. It's free. And they will literally pay money not to see it, right? So that's what we call information avoidance. So we'll cover principles that are more relevant to health in more depth on the health bootcamp. So that's one. And then the examples are much more health related. And we've certainly designed it to be at all levels for people who are generally trying to improve their health, who work in health tech, who work in healthcare. So it's very broad in that sense. Hopefully that answers your question, Aaron. Anyone else want to shoot questions at me?
Hi, Gonsal. This is Baswaraj from India.
Hi.
Hi, Gonsal. So I just have a question for you. You know, basically I'm into product design and product management. You know, I'm excited to see the 3B framework is like, you know, really helping me. I've gone through the document and then actually I had applied for the boot camp. So unfortunately, you know, I was, you know, I got a response from the team saying that the space is kind of, you know, there are a lot of applications and you know, space is not open. So I'm just wondering, you know, are those, you know, spaces open now for everyone so that I can, you know, apply once again?
That's a great question. You can just ping me separately and we can follow up, but it does bring up a really good question. So Irrational Labs, I think Robin said it at the beginning, but basically we're a behavioral design firm for good. So we are solving for health, wealth, and happiness. So, you know, I gave the example earlier of Coca-Cola, right? Their job is really easy. They're selling something not ideal. The boot camp is not available to you if you work at Coca-Cola. I'm not saying that's true about you. I'm just saying for everyone in the room, there's a reason for this application process. Behavioral science can be used for good and bad, and that's how we are aligning with solving for good.
Yeah, basically, you know, I'm a, you know, self-taught, you know, behavioral science practitioner, and you know, I've been kind of enrolling for all the courses, like wherever I see, I got to see any courses. I've been kind of enrolling, and then you know, I'm just learning everything.
Like I said, I'll take it offline with you, so no worries. We'll chat separately. Okay, so I see another example here asking for more details on text messages. And so one really nice one that we sometimes use is for showing up in court on your court date. So this is another one where in the rational model, we would assume oh, well, this person has to show up in court. You know, I think, I don't remember the exact details of it's like a parole thing, but either way, it's a study around court appearances, and they're summoned and they have a date and they have a time that they need to be there, and many, many people do not show up. And in this study, they sent the reminder. It's just silly, you know, it turns out that sending people a timely reminder, right? If we're thinking about, oh, maybe we should send them the day before so that they remember and they plan their next day accordingly, and then even day of, right? So text messages in particular are good when you have a timely thing that you need to intervene on, and it's better. Some of the question is like, is it for repeat? Is it for kind of future things? You know, especially if it's sort of a one-time thing like that, we may not want a model where we're constantly, so let's say you had to take a certain medication every single day. Maybe that's not the model of texting them every day. And if so, I would want to be very creative around the text. I wouldn't want to vary them. There would be different emojis on the different days. I would want to create a motivation of looking at the text and play around with that. But in terms of one-time behaviors that are so critical, text can be a really effective way. What I faced with companies very often is, oh, we don't necessarily have their phone numbers, or legal won't let us. You know, it's harder than it sounds to deploy text. But in a perfect world, text is way, way, way better than email.
Oh, just a random question on the key behaviors again. Have you seen any sort of literature, again, almost trying to do like a meta-analysis of the most common key behaviors that people are actually trying to fix, or, you know what I mean? Like within different disciplines, like for instance, these are the most common key behaviors in financial related matters, or etc.
That's a good question. I don't think so. I, again, would just say, too often, you know, we again work with private companies most of the time, and too often they're not even at the behavior level. They're like, I'm solving for engagement. I'm solving for XYZ outcome. I'm solving for increasing sales. I'm solving for increasing retention. And even for things that aren't kind of company and sales and related, even if let's say you're a product manager in health, it's often very, very helpful to get teams to say, oh, like we have a product in diabetes and pre-diabetes, and we need them to prick their needle, prick their finger daily. Okay, what's the key behavior there? How do we get them? What's the welcome kit that they get? How do we get them to learn how to do the first time? Like, getting people to that is surprisingly, I don't want to say hard, but like, it's helpful for them when we do these workshops to get a whole team aligned. I'm like, oh, that's a behavior. Oh, we can, now that we're all aligned on that, we can solve for that. It's amazing. The light bulbs go off in the room. Enrique has a question or comment. Hi, Enrique.
Thank you very much. You know, I think I have a chef apparel company in San Diego, and obviously, you know, some of the topics that kind of made me kind of a little bit like a puppy dog, like, that made me think about was, you know, our change in behavior because of COVID of time, you know, before now standard from Instacart to, you know, Amazon, you know, it's all these Prime where it's 2-day, and now that's the standard, right? And anything beyond that, kind of, you're like, wow, they're too slow, or, you know, changes the concept from the experience back to the consumer. But we just talked about a little bit about sustainability and that recycling and the change of, it works so hard to get people to bring in your own bags, right? And now you can't, right? And so people now got used to, I remember it took me such a hard time to, okay, I got my bags, right? I got them from Trader Joe's, I got my bags, I'm coming in. Now I got to keep them back because they're not able to touch them. And so now we're going back to this other sort of behavior. And then I see, you know, the local stores, the quality of the bag is still back to the other one where it's like more bags to be produced that one bag than before. And so back to your thought about this change in behavior, and like we've completely gone backwards, I believe, you know, at least in San Diego. I'm not sure about out in Austin or other cities where people are around, but you know, back to that concept. Now it's going to take a long time now to revert, and who knows how long this COVID situation is going to be. But in that designing for the future and those questions, I'm stuck. I'm saying no one's changing. Everybody stayed where we were before, hoping that maybe, I guess, the supply chain or so much supply that it's just sort of changed it. So it made me think about, the pivoting and change in the behavior and how we go to change our direction as a strategy.
Yeah. I mean, the bag example really hurts my heart because it's true. It took so much to get to where we were, and new habits were formed. I mean, in the Bay Area, it's like, I don't want to say illegal, but like from a social standpoint, it is illegal to not show up with your bags. You will be judged up the wazoo if you don't bring if you didn't bring your own bags. So I think, and what I think is going to be challenging about this, it would be a lot easier. We're talking about the vaccine as though there's this like moment, it's like, and then everything's going to be fine and just go back to normal. And that's not how it's going to be. There's going to be a transition. Some people will get the vaccine slowly, things will shift. It would be much easier actually if there was like a before and an after, and then an after, we're back to normal. We bring our own bags, all of the things. But the fact that it's gradual is actually certainly going to make it much harder. So I think we're going to have to think deeply around that. And I don't have the answer off the top of my head on how we're going to solve that. I do think that in COVID times, so there's these new negative, quote unquote, negative behaviors. We can also think about how can we create positive behaviors that endure post-COVID. So that's another kind of framing we can think about. So imagine we have more time now. We have more time in some sense. We're home now more. So, you've got kids, although they're a little older now, but if we have little kids, imagine, and instead of just most of us, right, our TV watching, Netflix, all of that has increased. We could also imagine creating a new habit, such as like every night before bed, we read one chapter of a book, right? Maybe your kids already do that. They're high achievers. But if not, we could create this new thing. And could we have that endure post-COVID? So I think there's an opportunity for us to think creatively around what are the positive behaviors that we can kind of set up now that can endure? Do we walk? Like I go on walks all the time. It's been wonderful exploring a new place, Austin, go on all these walks. I listen to podcasts now on walks because I don't have a commute, and that's when I used to listen to them. So how do we do this? But I think what I'm hearing, it's easier, I think, for us to do that in our own lives. I think in a more public level, harder for us to think about what those are. And for me, when I think about COVID, it's really like, how do we get people to get the vaccine? Like that is the Biden's task force. Great. Lots of scientists. Wonderful. Where's your social scientists? Where are we? How are we going to persuade people? How are we going to make this a norm? Are we going to give people the stickers? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Bruce,
why don't we take, we're coming up on 8 o'clock. Why don't we take one more question, and then we'll switch into breakout rooms for the networking portion, and then we'll come back together for general conversation after that.
Okay. So the question is, do you have a happiness example? So I will give an example that I saw earlier today. And I was on my morning run, and there was a house, and at the very, Jenny's smiling because I think she saw me post it on Instagram. There was a house that had a whiteboard, a big whiteboard, and they had done a sign that said, "Neighbors, what are you thankful for?" And there were these little markers in a tub, and you could write down, and people had written all kinds of wonderful things. I'm thankful for my health. I'm thankful for my grandchildren. I'm thankful for all these things. So of course, all of us have something that we're grateful for. We all do. We could all put it in the chat right now, right? But without the prompt, this is the barrier here is an attentional barrier, talking in 3B language. We just don't walk around thinking every day like, I'm grateful for this, I'm grateful for this. So if we create this opportunity, right? It's low friction, the markers are already there. That's a really nice way. So we know, and the reason I'm picking on this example or choosing this example is that it's research-based. Gratitude journaling works. It's an effective way to increase our sense of well-being. There's the other thing about that example that's really nice is that not only you are prompted to see to think of what you're grateful for and write it, but you see others. Like I got teary-eyed looking at it. I was like, oh my God, don't cry on your run, because it's just heartwarming to see that. Okay, breakout rooms.
Awesome. Okay, we're gonna break into about 6 different breakout rooms. That gives us 4 to 5. Actually, why don't we do 5 breakout rooms, adjusting to the numbers we have now. That gives us 5 to 6 people per room. That should give some good conversation. We'll do that for about half an hour, and then we will, you'll automatically be spread out into those. And then you can talk about whatever you like, explore, what you thought about the 3B framework and the examples given, or how it might apply to work you're doing, or generally, like, what interests you about behavioral design or behavioral science and what you've been thinking about lately. It's up to you, and the goal is to connect and make relationships that might lead to connections later on as well. And then in about half an hour, we'll automatically pull everyone back together again, and we'll continue with Evelyn and the rest of us to continue the conversation as a group. So we are splitting up magically now. Here we go. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Show of hands if you had a good conversations over there. That's fun, huh? That works surprisingly well. So those breakout rooms are pretty cool. So now we're down to a smaller group, which makes it reasonable to have a smaller discussion with Evelyn and everybody. So feel free to unmute and ask questions of Evelyn or bring up topics that that you are discussing that you want to bring to the larger group, or what let's start with maybe focus that a little bit more. After having had those small groups, did anybody come out of there with some pressing questions for Evelyn that they wanted to discuss? New questions? Questions you didn't get past before? All right. Well, if they come up as we're talking, that's cool. Actually, I think Sherry is an attendee who doesn't have a mic going, so I'm thinking she might have. She's in chat, and I'm wondering if she may have a question coming up.
And also, Evelyn, do you have any stories of, like, you know, something where you like had this hypothesis and the answer was like, nope, totally over here?
Oh, that's a good question. Let me think about that. By the way, fun anecdote, while I think of that answer and just buy myself a little bit of time. One of the things that we used to do in our office, so we're a really small team, like it's really, yeah, it's a small team, but Richard Mathera, who's one of my colleagues, is hilarious. Whenever we run, a lot of times our consulting work includes experiments with the company, because we'll say, we think you should change this, and really to make sure that it works, let's test it. And so often we'll have multiple conditions that we're testing, and Richard likes to make us bet on which condition is going to work. And most importantly, we usually kind of all align on what we think is going to work, but usually it's more like the magnitude, like this is going to increase conversion by 10%, or is it going to be 2%? Or, and so we all have to, we have a big whiteboard and we have to write out our numbers, and then like whoever loses has to get lunch. This was before COVID, of course, for the others. So it was like this complicated matrix of like so-and-so owes so-and-so lunch, but then so-and-so doesn't, because they, like there's all this complication. But yeah, it just kind of kept it fun, and it kind of keeps you humble when you're like, oh crap, I was wrong.
And another example of making private things public.
Oh yeah, yeah. And really, so pro tip for you guys, if you are the behavioral science enthusiast on your team, but you work with non-behavioral scientists, one of the most important things to do here is get people. So we talked a little bit, we didn't end up doing it, but like I like doing some of these Zoom things on polls, because you physically have to click which option you think, and you can really closely demonstrate, oh, most of you guys got it wrong. Because what happens is you can tell someone the story of an experiment, and you can tell them what happened. And after they've heard the answer and you walk them through the explanation, their brain does this magic thing where like, oh yeah, of course, that's what I thought all along. I knew that. Yeah. It seems, after you explain it, very intuitive, and your brain does this little shift. So pro tip, as you're telling these stories, get them to verbalize, or like whether they write it down or say, what do you think the answer is? Instead of, if they just hold it in their head, it's a lot easier to switch, right? So Dan, by the way, has done lots of research. For anyone who's interested on cheating, dishonesty, Dan's done a lot of research. He's got a video, I think it's on Netflix, the documentary. But basically, if you ask people, what number is this die gonna fall on? Magically, the number that they have in their head switches because, oh, they said it was gonna be 2. Oh yeah, it was 2. You know, it's a lot easier to just quickly change something in your head. But if you get them to verbalize, whether it's clicking on a poll or saying it out loud or raising their hands, that's a much more effective way. Yeah, pro tip.
Yeah. in general, it's just such a critical lesson about being more humble about, people feel so strongly that they know what the solution everybody needs is. And so you just see so many products being built just with a great confidence. This is how it's got to be. They don't test it. They just spend against it and just build something out and then find out far too late it didn't work. So, yeah.
Yeah. I will share one example. It's not necessarily shocking, but it does stand out. It worked, quote unquote, in our favor. So I worked with Dan on a scale. So we think a lot, again, we think deep, we like thinking deeply about big problems. And so if we think about health, weight is a big part of that. And if we know the stats, right, on obesity and diabetes and all these things have downstream consequences on people's health and longevity and all kinds of things. So how do we solve, like, we're not trying to, it's not weight loss in the sense of like, oh, sexy beach bod. It's just more like, could we get people not to increase weight? Can we reduce levels of obesity? Can we reduce levels of diabetes? And one of the tools for that is a scale. The challenge of the scale, there's all kinds of behavioral challenges, right? There's the idea of loss aversion, which is our weight varies daily. That's normal. So you should be up 3 pounds, down 3 pounds, 1, up 3, 2. All of this fluctuates. For men, it fluctuates even more because men tend to weigh more. So the variance shifts more. And unfortunately, on the days that we're up 3 pounds, that feels like, quote unquote, loss to us, even though it's inverted. But it feels bad. Like, why am I up 3 pounds? That feels terrible. But when we're down 3 pounds, it doesn't feel as good as being up 3 pounds felt bad, right? So there's this imbalance between the two, which basically means that we don't like our scales. We're like if you raise your hand if you have a scale, is it in your bathroom? Do you step on it? Or is it you shove it under the bed being like, oh God, I don't want to look at that thing. Many people don't want to see the number that's on it because of this relationship of, even if you're maintaining your weight on average the same, it's emotionally, it's a negative process for us. On the flip side, the data show that stepping on the scale daily does help with people's weight. It's especially when it's done in the morning, because if you do it in the morning, it's a reminder, it's kind of a signal to yourself. You just step on the scale, what happens next? You go have breakfast. What's the chance that you're gonna eat the donuts that Tim brought in, that frickin' Tim always brings in, versus oatmeal, right? You've just signaled to yourself, your whole day then kind of shifts. So stepping on the scale daily is good. And there's this loss aversion problem. So we redesigned the scale. We designed a scale that has no display, which sounds crazy, but this is what you get to do when you're in behavioral science. It's like, think about the problem. What's the psychology around it? How do we design a solution? We designed a scale that doesn't show the number. Instead, it took your, the back end was complicated, kind of standard deviation stuff, where if you're in your normal range, your color is green. If you're one standard deviation above, there were different colors. So we basically wanted to design a system of like, generally your weight's cool, you're doing great, versus like, oh, you're a little off track, or you're actually losing weight if that was your goal. So we did that. So to prove that this worked as proper scientists, what did we need to do? We needed to run a trial. We needed to randomly, and we purposely chose a difficult population. We chose lower income, lower education folks. They worked in various call centers around the country, mostly kind of in the middle of the country, already quite overweight, didn't move a lot. And we randomly assigned some of them to a regular scale, and we assigned the other group to this new scale called Shapa. And what we found was the group that had this new scale lost weight in this period. I believe this first trial we ran was for 12 weeks, it might have been 16. The group that was in the control group, which had the regular scale, gained weight in that period. So that, I wasn't even expecting that. Of course, we expected to, or that was the whole hypothesis for building the product, to see a difference between the two groups. But that actually now, with hindsight, you could be like, oh, of course, that makes sense. Like, that's part of the problem in the United States. It's just that every year, slowly we gain a little bit. And typically, by the way, pro tip, it's around this time of year that it happens. It's just that in January, we never go back down. The weight that we gain in November this week and Christmas, we never lose it in January. And so that gradually increases our body weight. So long-winded answer to your question of an unexpected result. Oh, I've got a lot in chat here. Okay. You guys are creating friction for me that I have to read these. This is easier if you just shout it out.
Yeah, Monica, you want to just if we just march down here, Monica, you want to?
Oh yeah, I was part of a. Sure, I was part of a pilot program where Mary Lou Retton was creating the scale where it wouldn't tell your weight. It would just, you would set your goal weight, and then as you get on day in and day out, it would just compare you to the day before and give you a motivational saying, whether it's like, oh, you're doing great today, do this.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it actually really worked.
Yeah, that's really nice. One cool feature that I'm especially actually proud of is so there was a survey that people did in the sign up flow. We needed to know certain things about them around like, do you live alone? Do you live with a family? Because we also gave them little random like tips of things to do. And we could customize those tips if we knew like, hey, you're the person cooking dinner for your family, or hey, you never cook. Like the tips need to be adjusted. But one of the data points that we collected was women tracking their period. And why is that? Because it is completely normal for women to temporarily gain weight during a certain part of the month. In what universe? So the system, the normal scale will tell you the number and it's gone up. And we psychologically interpret that as negative, but it's our human body. That's normal for us. It's not, we haven't actually gained weight. So we accounted for that in the system, in the math behind it. We would account for that period and adjust accordingly. And I think, just because we have the ability to build a scale that way, right? And here's the craziest part. We can build a scale that's like 121.73 pounds. Does the fact that we can calculate it to that accuracy mean that we should? No, no, not relevant.
Yeah. I would say the same is true of a lot of metrics-based behavior change. In fact, metrics are just as likely to hurt behavior change as help when it's consumer focused or individually focused, like step tracking and how far you've run and how fast you, and all those things. Like just the fact that you got out at all can be a huge win for somebody on a particular day, even if it's half as much as they did the day before. But
the step tracking thing I find particularly interesting, because if you oversolve, there's some data around like oversolving for steps, what happens then? Opportunity cost, like you have a limited amount of time. You used to go to the gym, again, pre-COVID, you used to go to the gym and lift weights, and now you're going to do steps. Calorically, that is not a good that is not a good trade-off, but the app doesn't give you credit in the same ways. You need to hit your 10,000. So we shift behavior in the wrong way.
Right.
Yeah.
And then just to add on to Bruce's comment of public-private. So when you're looking again, say, benefits or barriers, what are some sort of pro tips about, how to approach people when they're either in a public forum or private forum, or even pushing people into where they feel anonymous versus not, so that it influences their behavior in a good way?
Is that a question or just a?
No, like a question, like a question in terms of, right? Like, so, we'll act differently, right? In those two scenarios, we know that. So I'm not sure if you have an example where you're like, oh, here's an example where we push people, right, into anonymous behavior versus we push people into public behavior intentionally, right? Because we were trying to change this key behavior.
Yeah. That's a good question. I need to think on that. I know off the top of my head, there's some interesting stuff on social media. And this is a space that we're starting to work into. I can't share quite yet, but if you think about polarization and misinformation and things like that that are really important and that we care about solving. How we deal with forces that are providing misinformation matters. Ego matters. How someone looks in front of others matters. So if we were to flag a video and say, hey, like this actually isn't true, you need to take it down, there's different hypotheses here around, should that be done publicly or should we message that person individually first? And is there this idea of kind of saving face? And I will also add that, you know, we talked a lot about, so much of this research is kind of Western based, behavioral science biases its experiments, but some of the upcoming work that needs to be done and is, I'm happy to say, more and more being done, is varying the context. So some of the experiments that we are running in the future will have started in US markets, but will look at these, because the reason I say that is, you know, you can't say the word saving face without it kind of immediately think of like the Asian context that amplifies the importance of that. So yeah.
Well, that's sort of exciting research.
Yeah, I can't wait for us to be able to for me to be able to tell you more.
On that topic, something that we've been thinking about here that I'd be curious to start to hear from the group, different opinions, and Evelyn, you as well. We were suspecting that, and seeing some anecdotal evidence that people are not socially sharing if they or people in their close circle have got COVID, or because if your tribe is on the COVID believing side, on the side of facts, basically, it's sort of embarrassing that you maybe somehow did something that was too reckless and didn't listen, or your parents did, or somebody close to you did, or your spouse or kids did. And then, but on the other side, if you're entrenched in a community that is in denial, then it's to sort of have a similar strong social reaction to saying you have COVID because, or somebody close to you does, because it's sort of like going against the opinion. So we're seeing a lot of people not actually sharing that they have COVID. And then you also seeing lots of threads online where challengers hoaxers are saying things like, on Reddit, hey, has anybody actually, like, we're seeing it in the media a lot, but do you actually know anybody? Like, tell me if you know anybody. And I think that in that sense, people's personal experience might be low because a lot of people are not sharing socially, if that's the case. Do others feel like they're experiencing that or seeing evidence?
I've heard stories of people that are within minutes or hours of dying from COVID who deny that COVID exists.
Yeah. Yeah, we've heard about that too. That's pretty amazing. They swear they have something else. Let's maybe do it this way. Anybody have like a show of hands of if you know of anybody who has COVID who's not shared about it as much as you would think they would?
Here in Austin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
His wife outed him. He was like, no.
Wow. Yeah.
One thing that I found interesting, I have a friend who's in New York, and, being young, I think young folks are stereotyped for being a little bit more, casual, lackadaisical about COVID, especially being out and socializing. But she says, how many people lie about having an STD? They're doing the same with COVID. So I thought that analogy in her frame of thinking was really interesting.
Wow. I didn't know people lie about having, they claim they have an STD that they don't actually have.
The opposite, that they
don't
they
reveal
wouldn't
it.
disclose. Yeah. For the stigma and other reasons.
Yeah. social pressure or social influence is really, really much more powerful than is generally given credit for in design.
On that note, beyond just COVID or STDs, I feel like a lot of lies stem from a fear of judgment. And I think that things could be very different and there'd be a lot less lying if we embraced more radical acceptance versus judgment.
Yeah, it's interesting to try to wrap your head around the role that socially applied shame and guilt and things, acceptance and rejection, and because it clearly evolves because it serves a purpose as well. Like there is a tribal learning that happens beyond what our own brains are capable of doing, and variance within that any given population for breaking tribal norms versus like adhering to them tightly, so that some people are exploring new options without the whole tribe, the whole population going to new ideas too quickly. But there's so much new research around like the dangers of shame and the negative impacts on helping people function well. Doesn't seem as effective in controlling behavior as one might think, given its prevalence.
I think that's a really good point and something to think about when you're like interacting with people on social media, because like I'll see people post things that are like totally outrageous and I want to respond to them, but not in a way that's going to make them shut down, and it's really hard.
Yeah. I just find it very interesting. This is like old examples by now, and at this point I would like to see new ones. Facebook some time ago, I believe over a number of years, worked with Berkeley's Greater Good Institute. What are they called? At any rate, they started with wondering why there were so many complaints being lodged by users about images that then when Facebook's human reviewers went and looked, it was just like a person with a dog or three people at a party, or things that they couldn't see anything offensive with, things that were like thousands and thousands of images being flagged as offensive and being asked to be taken down by Facebook. And then when they looked into it, it was because of things like somebody that is now dead is in it, or there's an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend in it, or something that is that like in healthy human relationships you would be able to have a conversation with them and say, like, you didn't do anything wrong, but I would prefer if you wouldn't post this because it's hurtful to me. Would you mind taking it down? And yet so often it's young people, and also just in modern society, we have a lack of like learning about the social skills for being able to have those kind of conversations. And so they basically ended up creating a flow that facilitated the conversation, this better conversation, and found that a huge percentage of the pictures were able to be taken down without human intervention. Of course, that was like the Facebook's like financial incentive, but it also yielded a better social environment because people were now able to ask the person who posted it in the first place, but they were basically guided and doing it in a way that was respectful and clear and kind, but achieved the takedown of the image in a way that was communicating between the poster and the person who had issue with it, as opposed to requiring an authority to come in and do it and potentially stir things up. But I'm very interested in sort of improved social dynamics, moderated through, it's similar to Facebook only had a thumbs up initially for a long time, and they've recently put a thumbs down. And I see that, and it's interesting to observe the interface choices that sort of can encourage or positive interactions and positive social connection versus not.
For anyone who's interested in this topic, by the way, so I highly recommend Center for Humane Tech. We've worked with them a little bit. They're in San Francisco. They're wonderful. Tristan Harris leads up that group. So they have a podcast, which is great. They have a Netflix show, of course, that many of you probably heard of, which is, what's it called? Social Dilemma. So they're doing a lot of good work. Podcast covers lots of research. He gets to go deeper. He interviewed Dan, maybe I'm not supposed to say this, but anyway, at some point Dan will be on the podcast as well. And David Rand out of MIT, if you're interested in social media and especially polarization and misinformation, has done some amazing work. He's done, speaking of Facebook, using Facebook, the platforms like that, solving misinformation, reducing misinformation, it's a hard thing. But David Rand did some cool experiments where he had lay people actually, it turns out we're pretty good at identifying misinformation, identifying even just by headline. Turns out, anyway, so he's done some work where he was proposing that it's like really quite scalable from a cost standpoint. You can't pay all these, anyway, let's just leave it at that with the teaser. David Rand, check him out, MIT, if you're interested in this. That's more academic. It's harder to read. Tristan Harris does a good job of like taking some of these academic insights to having a podcast. Like it's fun to kind of listen to. Fun, a little bit depressing, also fun.
Nice.
Center for Humane, yeah, great. Let me look at those. Let me find those.
I did watch the Social Dilemma, and it was pretty sad. Like just kind of disturbing to see that, like how much people can be affected.
Yeah. Also, Jonathan Haidt actually is another good one.
Love him.
Jonathan Haidt has a really nice. It's like a Google Doc actually. He did like a lit review of like all the research that's been done on social media and its potentially negative effects. And the situation isn't necessarily as dire as just like the headline of like social media is bad. It turns out there's teenage girls are ones who suffer probably the most from it. So there's a lot of nuance to it. It's not all that bad, but yeah, Jonathan Haidt, I can see if I can dig up it's like a Google Doc. It's a public Google Doc that he has updated and it's freaking amazing. If you like nerdy stuff like this.
I would underscore the nuance involved. I have a lot of issues with Tristan and his presentations of things, and sort of like very black and white on a lot of things.
Yeah.
And that the Netflix movie has gotten a lot of controversy because of that. But I think he doesn't admit the degree to which he plays at the game he's critiquing himself. So one just has to, he's, so I think we have to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but it's important to he does bring up a lot of good conversations as well, a lot of really good points. So
yeah. And that's why I actually would recommend the podcast over for the movie, he had a challenge. It was a limited number of time. And he also wanted to go for a really broad audience and really get a larger conversation and not just a narrow group of people in tech or highly intellectual. So I think he oversimplified the message. The podcast is to because there's more time, each episode covers a certain thing. There's a little more time to have more nuance. But yeah, I totally agree. Oversimplification. Jonathan Haidt is another good source that has more nuance and,
Jonathan Haidt is better, yeah.
I didn't know there was a podcast, so thank you for sharing that. Check it out.
Yeah, I'm very curious about David Rand's work too.
Yeah, he's great. He's great.
Super important. I mean, if we, in terms of one of the key issues of our time, you know, we have so many critical decisions and to make individually and as a society, and if we are having like how truth is established, how to get to the relevant facts of a situation is so critical, and the fact that we have had a lot of forces actually pedaling us backward for a few decades now and leading to this situation is pretty serious.
Yeah, like I said, can't say anything yet, but stay tuned. We will have some. This has been the thing that has motivated me over the last several months. I've worked very hard on this, so
awesome.
We will release soon, hopefully.
Very exciting. Very, very exciting. Cool. Well, we've crossed the 9 o'clock hour, and thanks everyone who stayed to the end, the diehards, you guys make it all worthwhile. So Evelyn, thank you so much for sharing so much of your experience and your examples and the framework. Really fascinating, really valuable. I think people really enjoyed it. So we will be sharing the recording afterwards. And Evelyn, will we also be able to share the deck afterwards?
No, we don't. We like to keep
that's
our material,
totally fine.
not the deck. But yeah, thank you all so much. Back to the beginning, right? I know the context. Everyone is busy. You all have lives. So I'm deeply grateful for the time that you've taken to talk about these gloriously nerdy things. It's one of my greatest life joys to get the nerd out. I hope I conveyed that, and hopefully you fell more in love with behavioral science and how fascinating humans are and how wonderful we are. So yeah, let's enjoy this week and connect with what we're kind of like the photo that I saw today, right? The board that I saw. Connect with what we're deeply grateful for. We have a lot to be grateful for. Right now in this moment, I'm grateful for you all here, for the time that we shared. So thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone. Have a good night and have a great holidays, and we'll see you in the new year. We won't be doing a December event, obviously. So see you in 2021, a bright brand new year.
With a vaccine.
It's gonna be great. Good night, guys.
Take care.